Welcome back to Control the Freak. Today we're going to get quizzical, and we're also going to talk a little bit more about the aftermath of Charlie Kirk. So today we're going to look at some everyday examples. Some of these will be quite problematic and some of them will be completely innocuous. But if you're watching this channel, you're going to be interested in the behaviour of people and where control lies and where sometimes people see control where there isn't any. So that's what we're going to do today. This week, we're only going to go through the examples. Next week, we're going to come back, go through them again, and see where the control is in these scenarios. So, without further ado, let's have a little look at the first one. And this is about a chore rota. So, you've got a couple, Dave and Sam live together. They both work, and they both work the same hours. To start with, when they first meet each other, they leave the house at the same time, they get home at the same time. Dave's a bit of a clean freak. He can't leave the washing up to stand for more than 30 minutes after they've eaten. He hoovers every day, he cleans the bathroom, and he's got a rota for when he polishes and dusts around the house. There's a very strict rota for Dave. It keeps him very happy. He's very happy doing this. Now, the house isn't posh or upmarket, but Dave takes pride in his home. He takes a real joy out of keeping things clean. Now, when they first moved in together, these guys shared the chores. They were both kind of equal input, who did what. Sam was happy to leave the washing up for Dave because she didn't like it. Because Sam's quite happy to leave the dishes piling up until there's no more room on the drainer and she's got to do something about it. And when it comes to cleaning the bathroom, she's quite happy to leave the bath until there's a ring around it. That's her signal for there's a time to tidy up. There was arguments in the early days about this as it started to be more Dave doing it than Sam doing anything. And he couldn't see why Sam couldn't see why this was annoying to him and how it was unfair because he was the one always having to do everything. As time went on, Dave just thought, you know what, I'll just do it myself. Cleanliness makes him happy, cleaning makes him happy, so he just started to do everything himself. But there's always been a sticking point, recycling. Now, early in the argument chores, Sam said that she hated doing all of them. She did them just to keep Dave happy. But she has a thing about recycling. She cares a lot about the real environment, the environment all around us. And she could never kind of see where Dave's focus was on cleaning the house when there's bigger things going on outside. And Dave suggested she applied that to the recycling because that was one thing she cared about. So that's what Sam did. She would sort out the cardboard and the cans and the plastic. And she'd even take Dave to task on not separating them properly. So this worked for a while. Sam would take care of the recycling. But even then, gradually, the recycling stopped. And she kept missing the fortnightly collection. So there was a pile of plastics and cardboards. So Dave had an idea. He wrote out a rota and he stuck it to the fridge. And on that rota was days when he would do his tasks. There was washing up every day. There was the bathroom twice a week. There was hoovering 2 or 3 times a week. And they all had Dave's name against them. On that rota, Dave had recycling marked for Sam, that she would do it once a week on a Friday and she would have it ready for the collection Monday morning. This didn't go down well at all. Sam thinks Dave is being controlling. Next scenario, Amy and Anna. Amy and Anna have been friends for years, but over the last few years there's been a political divide growing between them that's starting to kind of push them apart and ultimately comes to an argument. Amy considers herself on the left, while Anna sees herself kind of somewhere in the middle, kind of conservative, but leaning more to liberal. Amy is ideologically invested in the gender movement. For her, gender's a spectrum, and people should be free to choose how they identify. And she's fundamentally opposed to anyone believing that there's only 2 sexes and that they should be able to dictate, using biology, how somebody else lives their life. Amy thinks a big part of society's problems come from the patriarchy trying to control how people identify themselves. Amy attends rallies and she protests for the right for individuals to express who they are at every opportunity. Anna's a little bit different. As I say, she's more liberal, but she believes in biology. She's of the opinion that millennia of structure, built on the recognition of two sexes, has brought us to the best possible point we could be that respects both sexes and works out fair for everybody. She also thinks we're in the best place as far as protecting women, but she doesn't see anything wrong with people identifying as their own place on the gender spectrum. For her, the right to choose how you identify is absolutely fine. She doesn't care whether you identify as a man or a woman, vice versa, particularly as the number involved doesn't really affect her. She's seen trans people here and there, but they've never affected her in any way. As far as that goes, she believes in live and let live. However, Anna draws the line at being forced to use people's preferred pronouns and men having access to women's spaces. After a rally, there's another gender debate in which Amy's really emotional. Amy is furious at the court ruling that says there's only two genders, whereas Anna says this is a logical conclusion and it couldn't really have gone any other way. Amy's furious, and she says Anna hates trans people by believing there's only two genders and agreeing with the court ruling, and that she's now denying their existence. Ben and Jenny have been together for a long time. They met at a gym. They're still young. Over months of gentle flirting across the cross trainer, they gradually struck up a friendship, which led to a drink after the gym, then dinner, and eventually a relationship. When they met, they were both young and fit, just starting out in their careers, relatively junior in their careers as well. But as the years gone on, Jenny started to climb the ladder, and this has brought with it some longer hours, client meetings, all on the company credit card. And as a result, she doesn't get home till very late, and sleep has taken a bit of a back seat for her as she's kind of leaned into the prospect of promotions, and it's paid off. She's doing really well. Even though she's working longer hours, Jenny was keen throughout all of this to keep on top of her health. Instead of going to the gym after work, Jenny started going to the gym early in the morning because she didn't want to fall into the trap some of her male colleagues have done, abusing the company credit card for a few more drinks and an extra pudding after meeting with clients. For her, she didn't want to fall into that trap. She wanted to stay in shape and she wanted to stay healthy. Ben's career path has gone a little bit of a different way. He hasn't been as successful as Jenny. There's no late night client meetings. He now leads into the homekeeper. So while Jenny's out working long hours, Ben goes home and makes sure that the house is tidy for Jenny. And after he's done all of that, he likes to lay back on the sofa with a pizza and a beer and just watch the TV. Because the truth of the matter was, he was really only going to the gym to meet a girl anyway. And now he's met Jenny and they seem to be happily married. He doesn't see the point in keeping that up. So he's let himself go a little bit. For him, the most important thing is making sure that while Jenny's out working long hours, he makes sure that she's coming home to a nice clean house and she's got nice clean bed sheets to climb into at the end of the day. He loves Jenny and he puts her first, and his personal health and personal fitness aren't really as important to him. He thinks she's working the hours, she's bringing the money in, I'm going to support her. So he's fallen into this trap of getting home, sticking on his joggers, cleaning the kitchen, microwaving a baked potato and just collapsing in front of the TV. And for Ben, this is a really happy existence. He wants to support Jenny in doing what she's doing, and he's happy just doing his part to make sure that that function works. One day, after another night of long hours entertaining a client, Jenny comes home and she finds Ben on the sofa. He's fast asleep. His belly's hanging over his joggers. There's empty beer cans and a dirty plate next to him. And she kind of reaches a breaking point with this. Ben senses Jenny in the room, opens his eyes, and one of the first things out of her mouth is, "You need to get back to the gym." Ben's hurt. Jenny's never made mention of this before, and she's just blurting this out at him as soon as he wakes up. He doesn't stop there. When he wakes up in the morning, there's a diet plan on the kitchen table, and he later gets a text to say that she's reopened his gym membership. She signed him up also with a personal trainer, and she's organised a diet home delivery service. So he's not going to cook his own food anymore, he's going to eat what's delivered. Stu is a single dad, and he's got a daughter, Debbie, who's 17, who suffers with a mix of bipolar and schizophrenia. Stu and his wife split up when Debbie was only very young, and that's around about the time that Debbie's symptoms started to come to the surface. There started to be reports from other children and other parents that Debbie was acting inappropriately and sometimes violently. And this culminated in the idea that Debbie couldn't stay at school with these other children, so he had to pull her out and put her in a special school. This led to a gradual isolating of Debbie, unfortunately. She didn't have her parents, and now she was only isolated with her dad at home, with a couple of hours here and there at this special school. Stu's wife left because she couldn't cope with Debbie. And try as she might, she was just overwhelmed with Debbie's behaviour. She couldn't handle it. So they made the decision between them that Stu would stay with Debbie and the wife would go off and find herself a new life. But again, that didn't help with Debbie's paranoid ramblings. She found that her mum disappearing only confirmed that there was something very wrong with her, and she sunk deeper into her paranoia. Since then, Stu has managed Debbie's care on his own. He scaled back his work responsibilities as far as he possibly could, while still earning enough to pay the mortgage. And between days spent at the special school and evenings with the one person she trusted, Debbie did manage to bumble along to some degree. Her paranoia and her rambling started to dampen down a little bit, but they never went away. Last year, Debbie's GP prescribed some new medication, and the transformation was overnight. She was lucid, she was less frantic, and she was able to hold a conversation. But recently, though, Debbie is now refusing to take these new meds. Debbie now thinks that she's better, and she's starting to look at those new meds and say, well, they never had anything to do with me getting better. This was a natural progression. Stu keeps meeting her every morning with these new meds, and he's insisting that she takes them, and this is causing some friction. Now, one of these scenarios that I've just described that we're going to come back to next week sails pretty close to something I've been meaning to catch up on in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk. I've said many times that the key to our salvation is personal responsibility, and when it comes to managing our reactions, there's no such thing as a universal reaction. For the uninitiated who haven't watched my videos before, the no such thing as a universal reaction proposition follows that I could walk into a room full of 10 men and say the same insult, the same worst thing you can imagine to all 10 men, and I get a different reaction from each one. One might want to hit me, one might actually hit me, one might laugh at me, one might ignore me. But there will not be a universal reaction no matter what I say. The statement challenges the idea, and this is the idea that control freaks hang on to, is that their reaction is the only possible one, and therefore it must be correct. But there's always a choice in how you react. The no such thing as a universal reaction proposition leads into my next proposition regarding personal responsibility. The fact that there are so many different possible outcomes means that you have at least one other choice that you can make, if not several. So only you can be responsible for the choice that you make. Control freaks just need to accept that idea, and then they'll be on the way to fixing their problem. Now, some people see this as too simplistic, and they argue that there must be predictable reactions to some situations, and that in those scenarios there could be no other choice. That being the case, there is such a thing as a singular reaction, and that outcome demands consequences. In the aftermath of Charlie Kirk, I'm starting to hear some people on the right say something that I've never heard them say before. And they're saying, yes, you can have freedom of speech, but not freedom from consequences. This is a sea change in the reaction of the right. You never heard this on the right before. It was always the left saying, yeah, you can have freedom of speech, but there's always going to be consequences. And they started talking about consequence culture. And most of the talking heads on the right managed to argue sensibly back against that. But now the tide seems to be turning. Because before you had people on the right saying that they had the right to say the things they wanted to say without consequences because that defined free speech. But now they seem to be shifting position. It's understandable in some ways. Some of the worst elements on the left spent the first few days in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death using the same freedom of speech that they seemed to despise for so long, voicing their pleasure at Charlie's passing and thinking that it was fine and that there shouldn't be any consequences. They were posting dancing videos, laughing videos, anything that portrayed a celebration at Charlie Kirk's murder. Outraged, in a move right out of the left's playbook, the right have now started demanding consequences for these vile depictions of glee. And that's when we start to hear, yes, you can have freedom of speech, but not freedom from consequences coming from the right side of the aisle. Apart from the violent act on Charlie Kirk and some attacks on the flowers and the memorials, what the right are now reacting and demanding consequences for is words, not physical violence. And they're now demanding consequences for the words that people have said. And this is why I wanted to revisit the concept of personal responsibility and the no such thing as a universal reaction proposition. Because if anything challenges my position on personal responsibility and no such thing as universal consequences, it's this right now. So here's my position for what it's worth. Firstly, to reiterate, this is my own position, and this is largely designed to help control freaks manage their own behaviour, but I do think it still holds some water here. I've said many times now that words do not hold a universal ability to extract a universal reaction. Feelings don't exist in the air around us. They're in our own heads and they're linked to past experiences and learnt values. The interpretation of some words, no matter how much offence you might attach to a word or lack thereof, is entirely subjective. I'll give you an example. I use the C word a lot, probably too much if I'm honest. I use it as both an insult and a term of affection. I call people who drive badly the C word, under my breath of course, and I call people I love the C word. My friends know I'm saying it with affection, strangers don't, but the word stays the same. It's got nothing to do with the delivery either. I can growl the C word at a friend as much as I'll growl it at a stranger, but the friend would still know I mean it with love. The word stays the same, but the receiving of the word changes depending on who hears it, in other words. And then there's even a spectrum of how it will be received in both parties. Some friends find it funnier than others. Some friends will still take offence when I say that word. And likewise, on the other side, people I'm saying it to where I'm not saying it with any affection, there's a spectrum of reactions there. Some will react angrily, some will react violently, some will shrug their shoulders and ignore me, some will laugh at me. So even within the people that I'm trying to upset, or even the people I'm trying to insult, should I say, the reaction is always different. Again, there is no such thing as a universal reaction. All words are a string of syllables, symbols, and noises, evolved to share information. Now, that's not to say that you can't use an innocent word with clear bad intentions. You've only got to look at some of the celebrations, for instance, after Charlie Kirk, where you've seen people dancing and laughing and saying Charlie's dead. But when you look at those words in isolation, depending on which side you're on, you could have a few reactions. So how does my universal reaction proposition stand up to current events? Well, at the risk of upsetting people further, I don't think it changes anything. You only have to look at the various reactions online as I've just laid out. Yes, there's been a lot of outrage. Yes, there's been a lot of anger, and some people have lost their careers because other people are angry. But you can also see other reactions, from the anger that I've just mentioned through to disappointment, dismay, disgust, indifference, even to agreement with those words and the way they're being presented by the people who are celebrating. There are people just as keen to celebrate this tragedy. Again, as uncomfortable and hard as this is, there are people whose reaction to the very same words, Charlie Kirk is dead, is joy. So if anything, this is a confirmation of my proposition. There is no such thing as a universal reaction. And my problem with people calling for consequences is grounded in that constant. How can we have universal consequences when there's no such thing as a universal reaction? I'm pretty confident of one thing. The people shouting loudest for consequences are really not the people you want making those decisions. Before Charlie Kirk, it seemed like most people on the right seemed to see sense in my proposition, because I imagine they were the ones most falling victim to people saying, I demand consequences for how you've made me feel. And it's ironic that people on the left are now calling for the protection of free speech that they wanted to deny people on the right. But after Charlie Kirk, with emotions high and outrage at its peak, the right seem to have switched sides, and like the left, they can't seem to see where this leads, despite being victims to it for so long from certain elements of the left. As I said in my Charlie Kirk video, I get it, I really do, but Charlie Kirk's murder was not only senseless, but it was also the inevitable outcome of the abdication of personal responsibility for our feelings and reactions. Charlie Kirk's killer, just like many on the left in the last few years, held Charlie Kirk directly responsible for how they felt, and the investment in that logic justified Charlie Kirk's murder in his eyes. Personal responsibility and accountability will be our salvation through all of this. One thing we don't want to do is abdicate that responsibility to others, because the ones most likely to take that responsibility are not the ones you want to have it. The fact is, you can overcomplicate this as much as you want, but it'd be the ones that want to take control who will overcomplicate it the most. I should take responsibility for the things I say. I should consider my words and do my best to be considerate. And if I do that, I cannot be responsible for how you interpret my words, because I knew the intention. Only I knew. Anything else is a guess. If I say something that I know is wrong, I say something in temper, then I should take responsibility and apologise. But the onus is on me to apologise. It's not your job to demand apologies from me. It's down to me to take personal responsibility. The moment you make a demand for me to adjust my behaviour, you now have some responsibility for what happens next. No matter how right or wrong you are, you must recognise that you are responsible for making a demand of me, when you could have chosen not to. Remember, there's no such thing as a universal reaction. Now, if I say something with the intention of hurting your feelings, I am responsible for that. I can be subject to rejection, and you can make several choices at this point about how you treat me. You can ignore me, you can chastise me. I could even be subject to attack, but the moment you choose one of those reactions, you take some personal responsibility for the choice you made, because you had other choices you could make, and you chose that one. I'm not absolved of responsibility. I carry responsibility for deliberately trying to upset somebody, but there's lots of ways I can be shown the error of my ways, and there are existing laws to deal with the worst possible speech. My fear is that they're trying to expand those laws. But as I keep saying, the best way to handle objectionable and controlling people, if you can't find a way to reason with them, is to refuse to engage. Controlling people thrive on your engagement. Conversation and reason should always be your first approach, but if you can't take responsibility for which one you choose, then don't engage at all. It's not always easy. There's times that you'll feel justified in taking people to task, but you must remember that you are responsible for your own reactions, no matter how right or wrong you are to intervene. What if I don't apologise? What if I spend my life intending to cause offence to others? Well, the fact is, even then, there's no such thing as a universal reaction. While I'll be upsetting some people, there'll be others who find what I'm doing funny. There'll be others who find what I'm doing as agreeable. They might agree with my point of view. And there's going to be others who just find me too stupid to interact with. But honestly, I think if everybody can take personal responsibility for their own reactions, it's going to be pretty clear soon who isn't taking any personal responsibility. And over time, society will course correct. Control freaks and other people with fragile egos do not want to be outcast. And if the rest of society is taking on personal responsibility and control freaks start to get outcast, you can be pretty sure that even if they do it from a manipulative point of view, they will pull themselves into line. Personal responsibility and accountability is for everybody. What we can't do, and what controlling people always do, is make other people responsible for how we feel and how we react. We all have to recognise our responsibility for our individual roles in the rally of discourse. Now, this might seem too simplistic, and remember, this is primarily about helping controlling people behave. That's what my channel's usually about. But imagine if everyone thought for a second about their personal responsibility in the rally of conversation. Imagine how nice that would be if everybody thought about how they were going to react. We wouldn't be in a position where we are, where police are called because somebody didn't like a tweet and took offence to it, but which other people thought was perfectly fine, by the way, or even funny, and Charlie Kirk wouldn't be dead. This is all down to somebody making somebody else responsible for the way they feel and the way they react. Look, I hope that helps. It's only my opinion, and as I say, most of this is designed at helping the worst of us, the controlling people amongst us. But I do think it holds some water generally where society is concerned. Please like, share and subscribe as usual, and I'll leave you with the usual. Control the freak, not other people. I'll see you next time. Behave.